Welcome everyone to our studies of Parshas VaYishlach with our friend for the year, Don Yitzchak Abravanel. And we have some really interesting questions and insights to share tonight. So let's get right to it. Very fascinating, well-known storyline in Parshas VaYishlach. You can find it if you're with me in the Stone Chumash on page 170. It is Bereshis Perek Lamed Beis, Pasuk Daled. We're starting with chapter 32, verse 4, VaYishlach Yaakov Malachim. But actually, Abarbanel begins, by way of context, important context, with turning back a couple of verses at the end of last week's Torah reading. Last week's Sedra was an extended paragraph, encompassing the entire Seder from the beginning until the end, 148 psukim. I think it probably is the longest paragraph in the Torah. The very end of the narrative in last week's Torah reading, describes how Yaakov came back with his family, with his wives, his sons, maybe some daughters. Certainly Dinah was there. And of course, a large household. We'll learn more about that shortly. And he left on reasonably good terms with Lavan. They had a mutual non-aggression pact, and Lavan kissed his daughters, grandchildren goodbye. And then the very last pasuk says, "V'Yaakov alach ledarkov yifgeu vo malachei Elohim." Yaakov went along his way, and he encountered angels of God. V'yom Yaakov kasher ra'am, and Yaakov said when he saw them, "Machaneh Elohim," said, "This is an encampment of God." V'ykra shem hamakom hu Machanaim, and he called it Machanaim, like two camps. And Rashi says that these angels, about which the Torah tells us nothing more, doesn't say why they appeared to him, what they said to him, what he said to them. It just says that he exclaimed, "This is a place of God." Rashi says that these were malachim who came to escort him once he entered the land of Israel. And until then, for the previous 20 years plus, he was in Haran, in the diaspora in Mesopotamia. Now he's finally made his way back to the land of Israel. So these new malachim, these angels associated with the Holy Land, are now there to escort him. That's what Rashi says. But the Torah itself doesn't say anything more about them. We continue to our Sedra, and we read, "VaYishlach Yaakov Malachim lefanav." Yaakov sent angels ahead of him. So Rashi renders it, the Art Scroll renders it, "Then Jacob sent angels ahead of him." And Rashi is the one who tells us that these malachim were actually angels, by which I mean the word malach is the word for an angel, but often is used for an emissary, for an agent, for a representative. And from the context, the simple understanding would be that these were agents, or maybe even representatives, or somehow like diplomatic emissaries sent by Yaakov to Esav. But Rashi claims that these were actual malachim, and the reason for that is explained by the commentaries on Rashi. I won't say what Abarbanel says. Abarbanel says that the malachim that Yaakov met at the end of last week's parsha, they were themselves not angels of God, even though it says that V'Yaakov alach l'Yaakov yifgu v'malachei Elohim, he met angels of God. Says Abarbanel, these were not actually angels. These were itinerant merchants. These were traders who were plying the paths of commerce. And they are the ones that Yaakov met, and they are the ones who told Yaakov, by the way, I wonder if you are interested to know that your brother Esav is on the way to meet you. Prior to that, Yaakov had no reason to expect that Esav would even be on his way. Esav lives in Seir. Yaakov is just making his way back to the land of Israel. He doesn't have to go through Seir. So they were the ones who alerted Yaakov to the fact that actually Esav is on his way. Whether Esav knew that Yaakov was coming, perhaps he did, or whether he just happened to be out and about is unclear. But they were the ones who alerted Yaakov, and Yaakov is the one who called them Malachei Elohim. These are angels of God, because Yaakov saw in this divine providence. He recognized that it wasn't just happenstance that he came across these traveling merchants who were able to inform him that Esav is on his way, but rather it was part of the divine providence. It was providential. And therefore, he's the one who said these people are actually emissaries of Hashem. They are malachim. Therefore, in that vein, Abarbanel says, when our parasha begins, VaYishlach Yaakov Malachim, he sent his own emissaries from his own camp to Esav, El Esav Achiv, Artza Seir Sedei Edom. Why did he think Esav would be there? He knows why, because he was alerted to it by the other Malachim. That's how Abarbanel explains it. And he told him, Kosamru le'adoni le'Esav, this is what you should say to my master, to Esav, I was with Lavan, by Charata ad Ata, I stayed there until now. So Abarbanel asks, why does Esav care where Yaakov was staying? And why does he have to say, I stayed there until now? Obviously, you stayed there until now because now you're coming home. You're still not there. You're not there still. You only stayed there until now, and now you're on your way. Vayili shor v'chamor. Why does he have to tell him what he has? I've got an ox. I've got a donkey, tzon. I've got flock. Ve'eved ve'shivcha, manservants, maidservants, ve'shlecha legilonim tzechein beinech. And I'm sending to find favor in your eyes. Says Abravanel, why would that find favor in Esav's eyes? Why does Yaakov need to tell Esav about what he has, about what he's acquired, about where he's been? How will that limtzochein beinecha? Says Abarbanel, very interesting approach. He says that it's usually understood that Esav is the adversary of Yaakov, is the antagonist of Yaakov. It is true, the Torah says clearly, that he expressed his intention when the opportunity arose to kill Yaakov, but that was a long time before. Esav, in the meantime, is getting on with his life. He also has three wives to contend with. He's also the warlord in his locale. And he's a busy guy, and Yaakov is a distant memory for him. So we don't know, and Yaakov himself doesn't know at first, whether Esav is his brother, that is to say, acting as a brother, or maybe he is his antagonist. Yaakov himself was unsure. When he gets the report, which we'll talk about shortly, then Yaakov revises his evaluation. But at first he's not sure. But he has a different concern. He knows that Esav is a man of the field. Esav is the trapper. Esav is the hunter. Esav is a streetwise kind of guy. And Yaakov anticipates that Esav has probably become a powerful, prestigious personality. But Yaakov also knows that when he left home, Yaakov, was a
It's good.
kind of, like we say in America, the 96-pound weakling. Yaakov is Yoshev Ohalim. He's dwelling in the tents, which according to rabbinic tradition means he's studying in the Beis Medrash all the time. Esav is the outdoorsman. Esav is the man of the world. Yaakov is
I'm
the
in my philosophy.
bookish, maybe egghead type of personality, who, in the eyes of Esav, is unlikely to have amounted to very much in the great outdoors, in the great wide world. Says Abarbanel, an interesting idea, a novel idea. Yaakov imagines that Esav is concerned that my brother Yaakov has been a schlepper. He's gone from place to place as a kind of mendicant. He has never amounted to very much. After all those years trying to make it for himself in Mesopotamia, he's finally coming back home. He's probably a penniless schlepper. It's going to be a bizoyon. It's going to be a degradation for me that my brother, my twin brother, is going to be a drag on the market. He's going to tarnish my brand. He's going to come to me looking for handouts. I don't want that kind of thing. So therefore, that was Yaakov's concern. So therefore, Yaakov said, I wasn't just going from place to place, trying to eke out a meager living wherever I could find it to schnorr a few kopecks or a few rubles. On the contrary, in Lavan Garti, I was with Lavan. Now we know Lavan is our uncle, even though Esau probably never met Lavan, but he knew him by reputation, and he would have known that Lavan is also a prestigious nobleman in his place. I wasn't just knocking around from one town to another as an itinerant beggar or mendicant. I was with yeah, with Lavan the whole time, and I prospered there. I have oxen, I've got donkeys, even though it's in the singular, but it's probably a way of saying I have all of these, even though Rashi mentions another possibility, maybe I only have one. But simple understanding is I've got multiple. And actually, I stayed there until now. I was with him the whole time, and I prospered greatly there. I have oxen, I've got donkeys, I have flock, I have servants, I have maid servants, and therefore I'm going to find favor in your eyes because you can be proud of me. You won't suffer from the association with your younger kid brother, your twin brother Jake, who's a penniless luftmensch. You won't have to suffer that way. That's limsochein be'einecha. Now you'll be quite comfortable that I've come back to live in your neighborhood because I've achieved great things in my own right. That's uh, how Abarbanel explains it, and I think it fits in very well. Those are the emissaries that he sends to that he sends to Esau. The problem is it doesn't quite go to plan because VaYishuva Malachim, they come back and they say, we got to your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you with 400 men. Abravanel also says that if they found it necessary to go all the way to Seir to find Esav, then he could be more relaxed because it means Esav is minding his own business basically. He's out and about in his own territory. And even though we said that he had heard that Esav is on his way, but maybe he thought maybe Esav would change his mind. Maybe he's just coincidentally heading in my direction, but he has some other reason. So he sent the emissaries to check it out. And he was hoping to find that Esav actually is not that interested and he's doing his own thing. But they said he is Bali Krascha. He's coming actually to meet you or to greet you or to confront you. And he's got 400 men with him. Now, Yaakov says this is a different situation. In that case, the brotherhood that I was anticipating doesn't seem to be on Esav's agenda. He's got something else in mind. And the next pasuk says on page 172, if you're with me in the art scroll, it's pasuk Ches, verse 8, Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzer lo. Yaakov became very afraid and distressed. Etc. Bravanel has a fascinating, extensive analysis of this experience, but the main thing that he deals with, among others, but the main problem he deals with is why is Yaakov afraid? Vayira Yaakov ma'od. Yaakov was very afraid. Why should Yaakov be afraid? What happened to his bitachon? What happened to his confidence and his faith in the God of Israel? He is Israel. And remember, Hashem had promised him years before when he first set out, when he was first fleeing from Esau in the dream, I will protect you, I will be with you, I will not abandon you, and I will be by your side until you return to this land. So now Yaakov is returning to the land. Surely he would have remembered the promise. Besides which, in last week's Parasha, Yaakov was with Lavan for a long time. For 7 years, he worked for Rachel. He got Leah. He worked another 7 years for Rachel, and then he got Rachel right away. Then he worked another 7 years. He worked 14 years for the daughters, for the two wives. And then he worked 6 more years for the flock and he became very wealthy. Okay, very nice. Why doesn't he stay there longer? Because, okay, it's true to say that he also saw that maybe he wasn't so welcome anymore. He was becoming too successful. But the Torah says that Hashem appeared to him and told him it's time to go home. So if Hashem tells him it's time to go home, why is Yaakov immediately now worried that Esav is going to kill him? And why is Yaakov so worried? And it says Vayira Yaakov Ma'od. So this is a problem that all of the Mefarshim grapple with. Okay, it's true that Yaakov is maybe outnumbered, but maybe he's not outnumbered. A couple of years ago, I was in Baltimore doing this parsha, and or maybe Yeah, I think it was around this parsha, and I met with a very fascinating man called Rabbi Dr. David Katz. He does a very popular podcast. Our son Yehuda is one who introduced me to him, and when we were in Baltimore, actually, we went to see him to meet with him. It was very nice. So I remember David Katz asked on one of his podcasts on this parsha. Uh, he says, why is Yaakov afraid? Esav has 400 men. Maybe Yaakov has 1,400 men. Yaakov is described as a very wealthy magnate. We find that Yaakov gives all of those gifts to Esav, and evidently he has, a lot more where that came from. Yaakov, of course, he's got his wives and his sons, and he's very concerned for them and for their safety. But in terms of numbers, maybe Yaakov also has an army, but he doesn't want to go to war, of course. But the point is that theologically, put aside the military prowess, but theologically, why is Yaakov so afraid? There's a song that we sing on Motzei Shabbos. Some people sing a lovely song, Al Tira Avdi Yaakov. It's a pasuk in Nevi'im. And later on, when Yaakov is intending to go down to Egypt very reluctantly, so Hashem appears to him and says, Al Tira Mirdam Mitzrayim. Don't be afraid of going to Egypt. Why, the Meforshim ask, why doesn't Hashem tell him here, don't be afraid? If he's afraid, why not give him the assurance? But the bigger problem is, why does Yaakov evidently need the reassurance? Why is he so? This is a famous question. I'm sure you've wondered yourself, and I'm sure you're aware of what Rashi says. The famous, again, theological principle, which is also an ethical principle, Shema Garam Hachet. Maybe sin has undermined the assurance. The divine promise is conditional on Yaakov's worthiness. Like all the blessings in the Torah, many of which have been fulfilled at certain times, but many of which have been uh, left, as if to say Hashem has abandoned the promise, because the promise is if we keep the Torah. It appears so many times. So that's what Rashi says, that Yaakov was concerned. Yeah, I know I had the promise, but I don't have such arrogance as to assume that I'm worthy of the fulfillment of the promise. Maybe I've become unworthy. But again, Abarbanel says that's very problematic. What had Yaakov done to make him unworthy suddenly? Especially since, as we said, the promise was only a short while before in Haran. Now, Ramban has his own thoughts on it, which Abravanel rejects as well. Ramban says, well, maybe there is something that happened. What happened between the time that Yaakov left Haran and now when he's anticipating a confrontation with Esav? The answer is there's something that we know very well that happened, which is that Lavan pursued him, caught up with him, confronted him, Lavan rebuked Yaakov rebuked Lavan, and eventually they came to an understanding, a mutual non-aggression pact. So Ramban says that maybe that's what Yaakov did wrong. He should not have agreed to that mutual non-aggression pact. He should not have entered into a covenant with Lavan. Okay, he doesn't have to attack Lavan, but he could go his separate ways without giving Lavan the assurance of his loyalty or something like that. That's what Ramban suggests. Abravanel doesn't like that. He says, Chas v'shalom, and he didn't do that wrong. He didn't do anything else wrong. So what's going on? So here we have a very interesting approach in which Abravanel says that indeed Yaakov was afraid. He was afraid of the fact that Esav is coming to attack him, or the expectation. I say it wasn't a fact because it turned out actually not to be that way. But he was afraid of the expectation that Esav is coming to confront him with 400 ruffians. And even if, as we said, we're speculating before, Yaakov has the capacity and the means to fight back, but when you confront an enemy on the battlefield, there can be bloody, can be violent, there can be death, there can be maiming, there can be losses. So it's not a pleasant subject to contemplate. But, says Abravanel, at the same time, Yaakov was totally confident. He was working with the divine promise, but at the same time, he was also afraid. He explains, in his view, this is not like Rashi and others say that maybe he's not worthy of the divine assurance. He is worthy of divine assurance, but he's still afraid. And he has as I said before, he speaks about this confrontation at length, but this is the main thing which he elaborates upon. And he says the following, that, uh, hang on, which is from the right place for his comments on this. He says that he quotes Aristotle, interestingly. He says that um, it's like a warrior on the battlefield. Hagibor ha'amiti, shebikansol lemilchama yifached mehamaves. When he is preparing or anticipating entering the battlefield, he's afraid of death. V'yagish b'sakana, and he's aware of the danger. Aval mipnei hamala yivazeh hachayim v'char hamaves hayafeh. But because he's a warrior, so he casts aside. I'm sorry. He casts aside life, and he chooses the possibility of death. And he quotes Aristotle, "Kamoshe Zachar HaPhilosoph b'Sefer Hamidos." This is Nicomachean Ethics of Aristotle. That a person who goes to war, he says he needs to be aware of the possibility of the danger. If he enters the battlefield with total confidence that no harm can ever befall him, then that kind of overconfidence, he's looking he's courting catastrophe. It's like an army that is overconfident, sometimes not rare, that it is a prelude to disaster. He says, again, Bravanel, I think quoting still Aristotle, like a wealthy person who is charitable, but he's wealthy because he knows, as we say in America, the value of a dollar. It's not because he doesn't value money. It's because he's a person of generous spirit and he supports causes that are important to him. And he's prepared to give generously to those who have much less than he. But it's not because he doesn't value money. You could say about a person who, let's say, works hard and succeeds in life, and he appreciates the value of money, where you can have another person, perhaps he's inherited a fortune, he's never really worked. So maybe they're both equally generous, but the first one is more deserving of praise because he appreciates money, but he still shares it, he still gives it. His point is, Abravanel's point is that Yaakov was afraid of his brother. He was aware that he could come to harm, but at the same time, he was perfectly confident. And it's not an antinomy. It's not self-contradictory, because it's only the person who's aware of the danger who can be worthy of praise for the courage that he exhibits. And in the view of Abravanel, he says, Hine belechto elav lo haya more al bitchono v'Hashem, Yisbarach u'biyudo, when he anticipated confronting Esav, it wasn't because he was confident that Esav would regard him as a beloved brother. That's what happened in the end. But when Yaakov confronted him, it wasn't because he was sure there's nothing really to be worried about. Esav is such a benevolent, kindly, tender-hearted person. On the contrary, his expectation was that Esav intends to do him harm, but he was still confident in the divine blessing. I just want to share with you what he says a little bit further on the same subject. He says, and it's interesting how he develops the same idea. He claims it's the same principle. He says, a person he's obviously talking to a man, who shir'e isha yafa asura lo min haTorah, a man who sees a good-looking woman and he has thoughts of approaching her and propositioning her, and he refrains from doing so because of the law of the Torah, that is a person who exercises self-control. He says it's not because he has no attraction to beautiful women. He does, but he doesn't gaze and he doesn't cultivate the fantasy and he doesn't pursue that relationship because it's forbidden according to the Torah. That is a person who's worthy of praise. And what he's touching on here is an interesting subject that the Rambam takes up in the Shmona Prakim in his famous introduction to Pirkei Avos in the sixth Perek, I believe, where the Rambam takes up this question further. You can look it up there if you want to. It's either the sixth chapter or the fourth. I forget which one of those. But the Rambam deals with that, and he says that the Rambam says, and Abarbanel is drawing on that here when he says such a person is praised not because he has no interest in the female of the species, but rather it's because he exercises the control and the restraint that the Torah places upon him. And he says it's similar to what it says in the Talmud. A person should not say, "Efshi b'vasar chazir." I have no interest in tasting pork or bacon. It's nauseating to me. I wouldn't have dream of it, and has no temptation for me. A person shouldn't say that. He should say, "You know what? A lot of people eat it. In China, they consume it by the ton, and other places in the world as well, including my own home state where they raise a lot of hogs." But the Torah forbids it. So since the Torah forbids it, I wouldn't dream of it and I wouldn't even cross my mind. But it's not because I find it inherently unsavory or unacceptable. It's not such an obvious distinction, but that's what the Talmud says. And this is what Abarbanel says, and he concludes, this is the true path to resolving this question of how Yaakov could be afraid. Says Abarbanel, Yaakov was not afraid. But he was not afraid only because of the divine assurance. If were it not for the divine prophetic reassurance, Yaakov realized that there's plenty of which to be afraid in this case. And he goes on to say that Yaakov therefore did not need Hashem to appear to him again and to lechazko and to give him a further strengthening, further encouragement. And not because he was guilty of wrongdoing in the covenant, the treaty that he made with Lavan, because Yaakov was complete and he was worthy. And in this way we can explain, he says, the fifth and the sixth questions with which he began. By the way, Abarbanel begins this Sedra, and it doesn't refer to the entire Sedra, only to the first section with 20 questions. And they're not just like yes or no questions. They're sophisticated questions, each one in itself. And that's why learning Abarbanel is a commitment of time, which I am very find very satisfying. We have only 1 or 2 minutes left. I want to just end on I think, an inspirational note. After reviewing this incident, the encounter of Yaakov and Esav, so Abarbanel refers to that famous teaching, which is mentioned and developed fully in Ramban, but it's found actually in the Medrash already. Maaseh Avos Siman Labanim, and he quotes it in a slightly different language. Kol ma shekara leYaakov im Esav, everything that happened to Yaakov with Esav, Haya Siman im bnei Esav v'zaro. It is a portent for what will happen with the descendants of Esav and the descendants of Yaakov. They are like a paradigm. They are they embody Yaakov and Esav as individuals, embody the destiny of Edom, which is Rome. He says, Zed Dorosh Hashem. This is the generation of those who sanctify the name of God, those who die al Kiddush Hashem. Instead of referring it to the generation that was subjected to the predations and the pogroms and the forced conversions and the exile as he himself and his uh, compatriots were, as he himself, Abravanel, was among the Spanish exiles. He doesn't refer to it in that way. He says, the generation of those who sanctify the name of God. And then finally, he says that Esav said, shall I escort you? And Yaakov said, no, you go on ahead. And I will go li'iti, I'll go more slowly at my own pace. So says Abravanel that Esav, by which he means Edom, and he means the Christian world, they have achieved prominence, eminence, prestige, power. They have built, he doesn't mention this, but they have built edifices and churches that are breathtaking in their architectural beauty, etc., etc. And we, he said, the Jewish people have gone slowly in the land of Israel and in the exile ad achris hayamim, until the end of days. So Esav has been the first Asaph has been the first to achieve the eminence in this world, but we will go more slowly, and we will find our way ultimately into Achris Hayamim, until the end of days, as the pasuk says, "Valu Mosheim Bahar Tzion lishpot eshar Esav," that the redeemers will come to Zion and they will judge the mountain of Esav, V'haisal Hashem Hamlucha, and the kingship will be to the God of Israel. So ultimately, says Abarbanel, reflecting in an echo, in a poignant echo, the experiences of his own co-religionists, his own compatriots in the years, because he wrote this commentary on the Torah in the years after this, his exile from Spain, and that's what he's alluding to here. So just to sum up, we have seen Abravanel's creative approach to the malachim, to the angels, the question of the fear. He says Yaakov was not afraid. He had perfect faith in Hashem, but at the same time, he recognized that he was entering into a situation that was fraught with danger, but he did at the same time rely on Hashem and his promise to ensure his survival. And ultimately, we said, Maaseh Avos Siman Labanim, that just as Yaakov survived the confrontation with Esav, in a similar way, the descendants of Yaakov will survive our experience in exile, and ultimately, Valu Moshim Bahar Tzion Lishpot Eshar Esav. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the disruption towards the end, and I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos.